Bruno Lanvin and Niels von Stedt of the INSEAD eLab. You're going to speak about your skills report. You've incorporated data from Asia. What are the key findings from this report?
It's the second time we actually produce this report. So we now have data for Europe that we put together as of last year, plus data for Asia this year. So the key findings relate both to the situation in Asia and also to the comparison between Europe and Asia. Overall, the skills situation is significantly different in Asia from what it is in Europe. Our conclusion last year was that Europe was indeed in a difficult situation regarding skills, and that action was urgently needed if the benefits from technological innovation investment were to be gathered. In the case of Asia, the situation is different because growth has picked up already. In many countries, the crisis is behind companies, behind businesses, behind governments, and skills is seen as one of the reshufflers of competitiveness within the Asian continent among Asian countries. And we see some of the leaders like Singapore that are securing their position. They're indeed continuing to invest heavily in skills and therefore keeping ahead. And others who have been leaders like Korea are actually falling down in the scale of skills.
You have an interesting graph, the total pyramid score. Niels, if you could take us through it a bit. The interesting part is the quadrant with the leaders at risk.
Sure. One of the things that we've done this year that's new is now that we have 3 years worth of data on the INSEAD eLab skills pyramid, we can not only identify and update the scores for 55 countries, which is what we do in the report, but in addition to that, we also know which countries actually grew and enhanced their score over the past 3 years, the crisis years, and which actually weakened their scores over the past 3 years. And so by taking 2 dimensions, one is their score for this year, and the second dimension is looking at the change in score, we've actually identified 4 types of countries. The first type are solid leaders. So these are countries that are above average and whose score increased over the past 3 years.
So that includes Singapore, New Zealand?
Singapore, New Zealand are 2 good examples from the Asia Pacific region. The second type of leaders that we identified are what we call leaders at risk. And these are countries that scored above average. However, over the past 3 years, their scores have actually decreased. 2 notable examples are Japan and Korea from the Asia Pacific region. And the purpose there is to really highlight, look, these countries are vulnerable to losing their leadership positions given the fact that their skills base is weakening. The other third group that I want to highlight are those countries that were below average this year. However, they actually over the past 3 years have been increasing their skills score significantly. And there we have countries such as Vietnam, we have Sri Lanka. These countries, if they continue at this pace, they'll actually quickly move up into the above average quadrant. And if they continue strengthening it, they'll also become solid leaders.
Your reports are basically focusing on knowledge skills.
Actually,
there has been a deficiency in Europe, but that would be even more so in Asia, isn't it?
Well, it depends on the countries. Some countries, such as Singapore, have for years been investing in a portfolio of skills, and that's actually one of the points we try to emphasize with the skills pyramid. There you actually have 3 tiers of skills based on 3 very different types. So you have the first tier, which is the fundamental basic literacy, ICT literacy skills. The second tier are the occupational skills. And then the third tier are the global knowledge economy skills. All 3 are essential to compete globally in today's economies. And it's important for countries to invest in all 3 types in this portfolio. Singapore is an excellent example of a country that continues to invest in all 3. And we highlight in the report countries that improved significantly over the past 3 years along each of the 3 tiers, so that other countries hopefully can see that yes, it's possible, and here are some ways how to improve each of those tiers.
Bruno?
As Niels just rightly underlined, it's important to consider the three tiers of the pyramid at the same time. The starting point for our analysis in this area was actually a request coming from the IT sector. Some large companies came to INSEAD and said, we want to invest in Europe, but we don't find enough people who would be programmers, engineers, scientists. What can be done about it? Should we expect to face the same situation in 10 years from now? Are governments going to take specific measures, or should we, the private sector, start getting our act together and churn out more of these skills internally? And looking at this, what has now become the second tier of the pyramid, we discovered that it does not make sense to actually consider them in isolation. That the literacy skills, the very basic skills in IT and sciences, are required as much as the top of the pyramid, the global economy knowledge skills. These top skills are actually the key skills required for innovation, and not just technological or IT innovation, just to produce the innovative mindsets that economies will need to compete in this century.
Go back to your pyramid score. This seems to be the sort of information that foreign investors would like in order to know where to put their money. If you're looking at the long-term investment somewhere, you want to make sure the skills are available.
It is definitely one of the key elements. A number of rankings have been formulated over the last 20 years to identify the conditions by which investment could take place, growth could take place, and standards of living could be improved. Increasingly, what we've seen over the last couple of decades is that infrastructure, like telecommunication infrastructure, connectivity, are key. At the same time, without a certain number of related skills, these infrastructure do not yield the business environment that they would warrant. It has often been said, for instance, that in the 1960s, countries like Korea and Ghana had about the same income per capita. A few decades later, the multiplier is between 8 and 10 to the advantage of Korea, and people tend to focus on broadband, saying, yes, this is a country that has developed its IT infrastructure, forgetting that indeed the skills and education component has been absolutely key for Korea to take advantage of this massive investment. Hence, the concern of authorities when our analysis shows that the skills situation in Korea is deteriorating, because they know that it's a primary condition for creating the right environment for investment and growth.
Well, Korea was a surprise to me. Were there any surprises for you within this report?
Another good example that highlights the dynamics that Bruno just described is India. India for decades has invested in skills in order to attract foreign direct investment in the area of service provisioning, especially in the ICT sector, and was extremely successful in doing so. Interestingly, now they've been so successful that the demand for those type of skills and even more sophisticated skills far exceeds the supply. And so as a result, maintaining their skills strength and the attractiveness of investing in India because of skills, India is now realizing that it has to invest even more in skills. So both the example of Korea and India highlight that it actually is quite an investment to initiate and create the conditions, the attractive conditions for foreign direct investment, but it's also a challenge to maintain that investment in skills, because the skills requirements are constantly evolving, and it requires a partnership between industry, between academia, and between governments in order to maintain an understanding of the future demand and to maintain the supply of those new skills.
You have China as a potential leader, and China is trying to go up the value chain in terms of skills and maybe shifting some of its low-end manufacturing to Vietnam or wherever.
These regional dynamics is a critical element that we will see more of in the years to come. But it's clear that some countries may have the critical mass to indeed generate skills by themselves. Others will have to rely on dynamics, which will include also economic dynamics in terms of where the investment is going, how they get production to be combined in their own regions. What is one of the striking elements in our analysis is that in the world, we were able to identify only 3 countries that have grown on all three tiers of the skills pyramid. And those three countries are Singapore, China, and Vietnam in Asia. Another example is Cyprus in Europe, but it is a rather specific example due to the convergence of EU policies. But if we look at what China, Vietnam, and Singapore represent in Asia, we have three totally different kinds of environment. Singapore is an established leader which is consolidating its position. Vietnam is the up-and-coming new kid on the block with spectacular rates of growth over the last few years. And China, which would have all reasons to focus in a number of areas where they can reap indeed immediate benefits, is also investing massively in skills because they look at the longer-term competitiveness of their economy.
So how do you think governments should be looking at this data?
Carefully.
We provide action plans actually for three stakeholder groups, because no government, no business, and no university can tackle these skills issues on their own. They each have a role, and they each have overlapping roles in this. And so we identify several ways forward in which those three stakeholders can collaborate and enhance the skills pyramid for a particular country. Vietnam, that Bruno just mentioned, is an excellent example. They've invested in skills, and now they've attracted huge foreign direct investment, such as Intel. They've just opened their largest manufacturing plant in Asia is now in Vietnam. However, in order to actually open it, Intel has had to invest heavily in collaboration with the government and with universities, both in Vietnam and from the United States. All of these folks are working together to build the skills in Vietnam to sustain these investments.
So this comes down to investment in education.
Yes, definitely, but it also points at the quality of investment, not just the quantity of investment necessary. One of the elements of our analysis for Europe, which we would very much like to extend to Asia very soon based on this first report, has been the identification of what we call best practices. Finland, for instance, has been a key source of such practices in Europe. And one of the examples we looked at in detail is the example of Aalto University, whereby the Finnish authorities, public authorities, with the support of private companies, decided to bring together their best business school, their best engineering school, and their best design school, and merge them into one single entity called Aalto, which has now started to produce people who have a major and two minors. So they are not just business-oriented people, technicians or artists. They combine all three. And this is one of the best practices we found to actually produce innovators. We are all confronted with the difficulty of defining, not mentioned producing, innovative minds. What we found, and I think there's consensus around that, is that diversity is a key element of this top tier of the knowledge skills we have identified. Clearly, INSEAD is a good example of how to build multicultural education across different campuses, time zones, and areas of the world has helped make it a top business school in the world. But this is spreading to other areas. When innovation is the key word, diversity is a key ingredient.
Just as we've studied critical success factors throughout Europe, our intention is to do the same in Asia Pacific region, in Latin America, in different parts of the world, because each of these regions offer their own types of success stories and critical success factors. Here in Singapore, for example, they've just, in 2012, they'll be launching a new university called Singapore University of Technology and Design. This is similar to Aalto University that Bruno just mentioned in Finland, but it's completely funded by the Singaporean government. It's got its own twist to it that I think make it also very interesting to understand. There's a lot of lessons here in Asia Pacific that Europe, the US, other parts of the world could learn from.
Niels Vonstad, Bruno Lombard, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.